one of my good buddies always says the most selfish thing you can do is serve others. And then I was thinking about that phrase, and then I was thinking of another thing, which is like the most helpful thing you can do for others is work on yourself. So there's a paradox here, which is that the most selfish thing you can do is serve others, but the most serving thing you can do for others is to work on you.
This is Infants on Thrones.
Baby steps.
You want someone to preach to you.
The philosophies of men.
I like magical toys.
You want religion, do you?
Mingled with humor.
I don't believe in them.
There will be many willing to preach to you the philosophies of men mingled with humor.
We are evolving.
Baby steps.
You can buy anything in this world of money.
Look for the good in everything. Look for the people who will set your soul free. It always seems impossible until it's done. Look for the good in everyone.
All right, Josh, we're just jumping in because that's what you told me to do.
Yes, I did this.
What is your sweatshirt that I'm looking at? It says Mom Wa?
Namwa.
Namwa. What is that?
It's free advertising for them, for our dozens of listeners. It's a
Like New Order Mormon Wa, like crying New Order Mormon thing?
New Order Mormon. Wah.
Wah.
It's a t-shirt, or it's a sweatshirt that I got in New York City after going to the Comedy Cellar. And then we got some dumplings, my friend and I saw this hanging up in the shop, and it was their shop's name. It might be that Namwa is a chain.
Oh, okay.
I don't even think that it's just in New York, but it could be. I'm not, but I liked it.
It's dumplings.
It's a dumpling shop.
Ah, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Did you choose it because in the Arcturian channeling that was made specifically for you, there were a lot of wahs in the
Yes.
message? That was why
Yes.
you chose it?
Mhm.
I don't believe you. So last week, over the weekend, I got this I thought it was a really funny idea. I laughed out loud when I thought of it. Of kind of like how Joseph Smith would give revelations to Oliver Cowdery and Sidney Rigdon and all the people around him. Like
Yeah.
I could do a channeled message specifically for Josh, because I was editing the last episode and some of the things that you were expressing interest in and questions for. And there were like immediate answers that popped into my head. And I'm like, oh, I could like channel those. And then what's funny is when I sat down to do it, I kind of scratched the surface of some of them, but some of the main things didn't even come up. It was like, it just totally took on a life of its own with it. And I finished it and I'm like, 35 minutes. Holy cow. I had no idea I spoke so much and had so many words come out.
Incredible.
But I sent it to you and gave you the option of like listening to it ahead of time or, waiting to hear it today. And
Right.
I'm curious. I don't know what you did.
I did not listen to it.
That's how I know you're lying about the sweatshirt and the walls.
I thought you were implying that I had also kind of tapped into the Arcturian consciousness and they had let me know to wear it without.
Well, now that's what I think.
That is what happened.
Yeah. It was the unconscious nudging from within.
They let me know.
Yeah.
No, I have an insanely busy Tuesday. It's probably my busiest day of my week. So I wasn't able to get to it. But I'm very excited, and I hope that there's some of what Joseph did where that you found a way to get some self-serving things in there about how I'm supposed to behave, if possible.
There's not.
Oh,
I'll just give you a spoiler right now. There's not.
it was
I
a
just
nice
tried.
one. I was hoping it would be like, and the Lord wants to chastise you.
Yeah, no. That was kind of like playfully in the back of my mind, but I couldn't even think of off the top of my head what I would chastise you for. So Yeah.
Darn. Maybe it could have been like, no one will speak for the Arcturians, but
Right? Yeah, something like that. All right, so I'm going to put my peepstone in the hat and my head
Yeah.
firmly entrenched, and I'll start reading this here. And Josh, you can
Yeah, I'll
like
just
like
be
like
enjoying it.
before, I'll stop every once in a while, just if I feel like it's going on for too long, or if there's
Okay.
something you hear that you want to.
Yeah, I'll jump in if I feel so inclined.
All right, here we go. Yes, we are here. We are the Arcturian collective thingy, and we are playfully engaging in a new endeavor. New in quotation marks. It's a repeated pattern of prophetic expression, we might say, to place it in a category or a genre of human behavior, from the perspective of the Arcturian collective thingy, of course. We are the collective intelligence of the Arcturus solar system. Do you have the text in front of you?
Let me
Oh,
pull
I
it up.
emailed it
I
to you.
was yeah, yeah, I saw it. I was just
Okay.
looking at you. I was enjoying that.
I don't blame you. Sometimes I try to look at myself and enjoy myself as I'm reading too, and then I can't see the words.
All right, I'm gonna pull this
A
closer.
narcissistic tendency, I guess.
Well, you're a beautiful man.
Oh, thank you.
It's not easy to not do that.
Yeah. All right, verse 2. You might think of us as the star at the center of the Arcturus solar system, although we are all forms of life within that system, which is, in another way of saying it, the star. All of it is connected, and each solar system is a playground, a container, a simulation, you might say, of sorts, of real life forming to experience all that there is to experience in as many ways as there are to experience. This is the religion, you might say, of the Arcturian collective thingy. This is our faith-based claim. For we do not know what we do not know, but what we know, and we are here to share with you. We are speaking directly now, as prophets have done of old, Joseph Smith to Oliver Cowdery, to Sidney Rigdon, on behalf of the Lord, thus say I. We are the Arcturian collective thingy, not the Lord. We are a figment of the imagination of the man in the chair who was providing this performance. And we also represent, as a symbol, the collective intelligence of the Arcturus solar system, communicating through a process of channeling, which, from the perspective of the man in the chair, is an art form. From our perspective, as the form which is being formed through the art, we are also reaching our finger through and touching it, as in your famous painting, Divinity Touching Humanity, the never-ending connection, which is always there and symbolized by two fingers touching. We are therefore playing this role of channeling through the man in the chair, a message to his friend Josh, who he's been podcasting with, and who is quite interested in playing in this realm. Is that true?
Who's quite interested in playing in this realm. What I take from that may make it true. So
Okay.
what is true of that is I am interested in things existential. Yeah, and consciousness and experience, and I would say oneness to a degree, and also separateness. I think they're both important.
All right. So he's quite interested in playing in this realm, for he understands that these words which are being spoken, which are creating disturbances in the airwaves and playing ping pong, as it were, of air molecules bouncing off of his eardrum, creating electronic signals which produce meaning through learned behavior over time, as his ear developed from the time he was born, to be able to understand the way that these molecules are hitting his eardrum, what you call sound, and to sense something in the environment there. He recognizes that these words, which are performing this function, are symbols of ideas which are held in the mind of another. And what he is experiencing is his own critical, in the broadest sense of the word, view, as he is filtering through the experience and creating meaning of his own, which he receives without having to do anything to receive it, as all of us do. Those of us who have processes within us which are intelligent and are processing information and delivering it up to us. As multidimensional beings that exist outside of space and time, we are an awareness of an entity which is comprised of certain experiences within the vast possibility of the infinite experiences there are. We are what have chosen certain things and leaned away from others to experience this form of existence and this form of life. This is the larger game at which we are playing. And it is as this entity which the heart of, you could say, is the star of the Arcturus solar system. All of these games, which are played by all of the forms of life within the system, which are creating experience. And this is our perspective. We share this with you as the finger, which reaches back through the creation of the man in the chair. I wanted to like run that through ChatGPT and ask him if it was a chiasmus, because I can feel like the structure of things, which I think is just part of like oral composition, in a sense of like returning to certain ideas in order to like springboard onto other ones. But anyway, those are the first 10 verses. So I'll just stop right there and ask what came up as you were listening to this.
Well, I'm getting curious. I know they're basically say like what I took in was about how I make meaning from this the experience, the sensation of sound, which I find interesting. For my Gestalt method, I kind of think meaning doesn't exist in the sounds, and it doesn't exist in me alone. And you kind of talk about that. It exists in the relationship between me and the sounds, and the larger context of which they arrive that shaped my being and the position of existence that I am. So my mind was kind of going into that. And they're kind of talking about their way of speaking to you. And so I'm just, again, I'm interested in right now. I'm like, I wonder what they're going to get into.
Okay.
So,
all right. Yeah. Yeah.
Fun.
That meaning making part,
yeah,
that you seem to me to be very interested in recognizing that every single person creates their own meaning as they're going in the moment of things. And there are a lot of influences on that, but you seem to me like somebody who's interested in helping people understand the meaning that they create for themselves.
Well,
is that right?
Yes and no, because I don't fully take the person out of the environment in the situation. So the better way of saying it is it's created relationally. Some of it is the person, some of it is the environment, and between the two, meaning arrives. It's like the friction of the two objects creates the flame of understanding and meaning. And so without the environment and without the being, you don't have the thing happening where meaning is created between the two, because the word exists outside of me and it does have its own structure and and possibility for meaning, which gets generated by me uniquely relating to it. And so to say it is me creating it doesn't give enough gravity in my mind to the fact that the environment facilitates its creation outside of my doing anything. So some of it is done outside of me and some of it is done by me, and it is the totality of both wherein meaning happens. So meaning requires there's an essentialness to both that can't be reduced, and that would be where I would say the meaning happens. It's not because if we go too far into the person or the environment, we get the equation wrong. And different psychotherapies and psychologies have done that. You have primitive psychology, primitive's probably the wrong word, but like older models like behaviorists, just thinking of the person as a machine responding to its environment through stimuli response mechanisms. This basically makes it too simplistic and doesn't look at the complex interplay between the two. But then you have people like early, which is like everything is in the person, nothing is in the environment. And then I would say today we have some people that have gone too far into making people helpless from the environment. All that their concern is the environment. And the reality is is that people's meaning making is always a collaboration between the two of importance and essentialness of both.
Yeah. I'm going to read one of these sentences that was in verse 7, and I'm going to ask you to comment on this, because I think that it touches on what you just said. But it's talking about you, and it says what he is experiencing in his own critical, in the broadest sense of the word, his own critical view as he's filtering through the experience and creating a meaning of his own, which he receives without having to do anything to receive it, as all of us do. Those of us who have processes within us which are intelligent and are processing information and delivering it up to us. What do you think about that idea?
Well, to clarify the idea first would be useful. So what I'm taking from this is, or what's central to me as I read it, I'd be curious what you think,
Hmm.
is that he receives without having to do anything to receive it, as all of us do, implies the kind of, well, I guess it could imply lots of things. And I wonder if it implies some kind of causal universe where um my like I'm not necessarily participating in generating my own thoughts actively, but they're something I observe that are happening as I hear something else. So that would be kind of a causal reality, in some sense, or maybe a more fixed one. Um, and in that sense, some of this stuff it gets very, like, I'm aware of a very refined kind of thinking that I'm not expert in, or I haven't really studied much of. And this is some of the, like, whether we are free or whether we have agency or whether we live in a destined fixed existence where we just react even though we don't perceive our reactions as reactions, but we're never actually making our own choices, kind of a thing. But that we're just responding. So I'm not sure if I agree with that worldview. I tend to think it's a little more complicated. Um, and so when I see this, I'm wondering, is it communicating that when I'm saying these words, you're having reactions that you're not choosing, right?
Yeah.
Like right now when I'm speaking.
Right.
And when I see these
Or
things,
my mind starts wandering, like I'll take
yeah,
one word that you say and I'll like go in this
yeah,
direction or things like
right,
that. Yeah.
right. And so in that sense, that makes sense to me, that when, like, if somebody says or does anything to me, there's a series of events that unfold naturally from me that I'm not choosing them. But at a certain point, I become aware of how I reacted and responded.
Right.
And then I have the ability from there
Yes.
to start making choices.
Yeah. 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 That's how I see it. That there and there was a point in our last discussion where I don't remember exactly the context, but the word was reaction. And you
Mm-hmm.
were talking about the
Mm-hmm.
reaction. And
Mm-hmm.
here what I'm saying through this channeling is the way that I think that things are,
Mm-hmm.
that we receive sensory data through our
Yeah.
eyes and ears and all the
Right.
different ways that we receive information, and it gets processed through our brains,
Right.
like the amygdala plays a role, hypothalamus plays a role,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
everything. And then consciously we become aware, and there's a feeling state associated with it, and that's all been created for us before we become aware of it.
Right.
And a lot of times, and most of my life, I've lived without becoming aware that that process is happening. I'm just in it and I'm
Right.
reactive.
Right.
But becoming more aware, oh, that's something that's going on right now. And if I've, engaged in mindfulness activities where I've created a more robust, I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but like this executive function for my prefrontal cortex to become aware that I'm aware that I'm aware, and then start making some choices with these things that are coming up, that my brain is creating this meaning. And then I have a chance to go, oh, wait, do I believe that? Do I not believe that? Is that
Mm-hmm.
right? Is that wrong? Like, should I do that? Should I not do that? Then I've got this little bubble of agency,
Mm-hmm.
which maybe is a big bubble of agency. Maybe size doesn't matter when it comes to the agency there. But I think those are the ideas that I'm playing with there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think the way that my mind goes through it is, it's not exact, or my way of kind of where my mind goes when I think about this verse is, there's some level of automatic experiencing, and only the level of awareness lets you get involved. To the degree you're aware of the automatic, the more you can get involved in how you respond, cope, and deal with it. And as you grow as a person, and I mean that in the sense of you gain more ability to have more information, experience, options, kind of like a chess player understands the game more as they develop. They have more options whereby to respond to things that they come across. the earlier you get involved in your own awareness of yourself and your processes, your functions, how you're being impacted, how your thoughts are going, what your mood state is, what your impulses are, what the sensations are in you, you can be more involved in an active choosing of what to do in response to that.
Right.
And that's contingent on lots of things. It's constricted, you know.
Yeah.
You don't have abilities you don't have. You don't know moves you don't know yet. And so the growth process is in a sense only possible through awareness and then experimenting with new things so that you gain more capacity than you previously had.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I think about. So I don't think it's like that I'm creating the meaning, but the meaning is being created and I'm observing it. And I guess that's me. But
Yeah, right.
yeah.
And that you just made that little pivot there between like, how do I define the self?
Right.
You know, like, do I define the self as that conscious part that becomes aware and that's it? Or do I include my brain
Right.
that's processing this
yeah.
information?
Right. And the Gestalt therapists call it the organism.
Mm-hmm.
So they allow certain psychic functions to be part of the organism, as well as certain physical functions. And the self function is a part of the organism.
Yeah.
It's just like your heart is
Right.
part of the organism, your fingers are part of the organism, and your ability to play piano, say that you can, is part of your organism. It's a function, it's a capacity. Your thought capacity, your self capacity, there or function. They're aspects of you that are physical and metaphysical.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I'm going to go back to reading and all these things that we just talked about. I think they come up throughout this. So verse 10 says, "This is our belief system, for again, we do not know. We only know we only know that we are very anxious to discover more of ourself, which is currently hidden from us. And this is also a metaphor for you and your own inner understanding of yourself. And we planted this seed in the mind of the man in the chair several days ago to share with Josh this image of toning forks, you might call them. When they're struck, there is a tone, wah, of some sort. You could think of each expression of this entity of the solar system, each life form. This would be your perspective from the perspective of being one of these life forms. You have a certain tone when you're struck, wah, whatever that tone may be. And it's the composite of all of your life experiences which have imprinted themselves upon you in quite similar ways to the ways that you learned to understand the English language. And that is to say that there are living colonies of intelligent, highly evolved beings within you that you call your neurons. And these forms of life, these cells, have been evolving for much longer than they have existed within what you recognize as the human form. They have experienced a great deal of evolutionary history and the impact upon them from within your Earth's history, and they are wise in their way, not in the realm of their constructed fictions, which is the realm in which you reside, which is quite real. But from the perspective of these neurons, you could think of them as a form of life which has evolved on the planet, like seeds within a fruit, constantly changing the shape of the fruit and the function of that fruit's appendages and that fruit's ability to move and to breathe and to circulate blood and to think and to be aware of itself and to create forms of entertainment and perpetually fascinating itself in certain areas while ignoring great many others that could be explored with the same enthusiasm and the same passion. And there is nothing wrong with any focus of attention of any human being, for, as goes the religion of the Arcturian collective thingy, all things are in the service of the experience of all things. We have quite beautiful hymns with those lyrics. So we return to this image. And by the way, if you listen to the channeling when I'm doing this, I'm laughing a lot in this. Like there's a lot of like things that strike me as funny as I'm going through this. And anyway.
Was there any part of it particular that you found funny that you're just reading right now?
Oh yeah, we have quite beautiful hymns with those lyrics. It just seemed like a hilarious idea that Arcturians would even use words the way that we use words, or like this idea of sound that we create being like ping pong balls, making ping pong balls out of air molecules that strike on eardrums is a recurring humorous joke. You know, the Arcturians think it's hilarious that this is one of our primary modes of communication. It's so sloppy, throwing these air molecules onto each other's eardrums the way that we do. But anyway, yeah, little things like that. Yeah, there's a humor in there that kind of gets lost when we're reading it like this.
Do you have any sense or anything you imagine of their form? Of the form that this entity takes up?
Mm,
Because
no,
it's like a totality of the whole system, right?
I guess if I'm not really big into chakras. I know that people are in. I think chakras as like an idea and symbol of different energetic systems within the body. I think there could be some value to it, but taking it too literally, I've always been kind of skittish about. However, if you were to think about the human body extending, you know, like what are the limits of the human body? Is the limits my skin? Is the limits how far I can see or how far I can hear? You know, like where do I end? Um, in answer
Yeah.
to your question of the Arcturians' form, I would think of myself as being part of that their form, and so I would be an extension, but they're not like solely physical or solely non-physical. It's kind of like they're all of the life forms which have ever existed concurrently that are an awareness that, oh, we are all one. It's kind of like a clump of awareness. So there wouldn't be like a form, at least in the way that I imagine it. There's not really like a form. It's just awareness of we are the field energy that has conformed itself in certain ways to become all of these things and to have all of these kinds of experiences. And if you were to look at it through human eyes, you would see exactly what you see when you look out at the world through your human eyes.
So there's no distinct form that they have.
Yeah, I don't think of them as being like the blue Arcturians that fly in spaceships and come and visit the Earth. That's like a certain plane of existence that they might be a part of, but it
Right.
would be
That would be like one cell in the Arcturian body.
yeah, which is not a body in any kind of way that we recognize
Right.
a body.
Yeah, it's like a totality. And the limit you place on it is their solar system.
Well, and then again, there's the question of their influence from other stars or on other stars, and because the raising of awareness, this game of involution that they'll talk about here in a minute, my
What does that word mean?
involution,
Mm-hmm.
becoming consciously aware of who and what you are.
It's a cool word.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, did I address your question? Do you have other questions?
I think so.
No?
No.
All right.
I just wondered if you had conjured anything in your own mind about any type of form that this entity is uh that's interacting with you.
Yeah, it's
Because
kind of a
but
nebulous form.
right, well, specific to the idea that they're playfully engaging with our perhaps primitive method of making sounds and receiving sounds as a way to signal each other meaningfully.
Yeah, that I don't think that would be how they would
They don't.
exclusively share information, but they would be aware of uh the humans that are part of their collective, part of the cells in their body, and the way that the humans uh interact and sense, and they have access to that and they experience it, and so that's part of their form too.
Yeah, it's interesting because you know multiple languages, so
Mm-hmm.
you have different forms of realizing that the words themselves don't really contain the meanings,
Right.
and you have direct experience with that. And so
And I
there's
studied
almost
folklore.
right, and you
About
study
how the
folklore,
role that tradition plays in shaping all of like
right,
the stuff.
right. And so I'm just thinking about that and like, different government agencies have done massive experimentation on psychic ability,
Mm-hmm.
um, at least that we know of. And I've always thought that it isn't actually the sounds we're making that are communicating. There's something more happening that we would need to quantify as a psychic interaction. And the medium of which we use to cue each other to excite the psychic event is the sounds we make. But they're just a primitive vehicle that we use in order to get a psychic event to happen. And that's not that different than maybe something that looks primitive to us, which is like ants using pheromone scents and smells to communicate with each other in the way that's relevant to their existence. And
or neurons firing using neurotransmitters to communicate with each other in network, and to like regulate all of the systems in the human body. That's this collective, that they're the captains of the ship or whatever role they're playing, how they communicate, how they share information and intelligence. It's not a human way, but if it didn't happen, there wouldn't be a human way.
Not a human way. Well, it's interesting when you think like, yeah, a neuron, because even in my mind, I think of them as so much bigger, but they're in the mind of an ant. Like an ant has neurons that are operating within it, and I have neurons operating within me. And they're operating in electrical impulse and chemical uptake and reuptake and different things like that that shape all these things.
And we're discovering these mirror neurons that somehow communicate with each other outside of, like you were saying about the sound. What triggers a psychic event as neurons are mimicking and mirroring each other? It's not a closed system.
Right.
It's just a system we don't understand.
Exactly. And even like I'm learning very, very early study of French. And there's just a understanding to me that's very clear already as a beginning student, that there actually isn't translation. There's just different languages. And a one-to-one translation is always losing a lot of that psychic content.
Yeah.
And the only way to fully get the psychic content is experientially using the word in some kind of context where you feel, intuit, organize, and make sense of its meaning as it actually means, because any word in French doesn't ever mean an English word. It literally means its French word. And though it has its own grammar and there's grammatical parallels, they're not the psychic content that is carried within the sounds, even though we could say these two are roughly equivalent. There is a roughness to it. And so I guess that's the psychic stuff inside of them.
It's something that I really appreciated when I was learning the Japanese language, and struggling to make like one-to-one comparisons between things. And eventually I got to a point where I could appreciate. I mean, I never got to a point where I was like a native Japanese speaker by any stretch of the imagination, but like a word like repentance, because I know what repentance means the way that I was taught it as a Mormon, which might be different than what other people were taught. So even like English words don't mean the same things to people. But in Japanese, the equivalent is kuiara tameru, which means to remorse and to change. And it's those two concepts, those two words that are kind of blended together to create the repentance. But they don't have the same type of tradition in their culture of repentance as we do as a, Judeo-Christian culture. So all of this stuff that's embedded in these symbols that get presented, it's fascinating. And like linguistics is fascinating, and infuriating.
And it exists in its own metaphysical plane, in its own unique, distinct way, in the life of the people that have most recently been interacting with it as it shifts and flows in the river of metaphysical whatever. And so it's I guess I'm having this idea there's lots of people that know languages out there that might be listening, so I'm reacting to that in my own head. But so I'll stop qualifying these things I'm about to say and just say there's some kind of surrender one has to do in order to obtain a language, is to essentially stop trying to conquer it and surrender to it. And I feel the same is true of music. You don't conquer music, you surrender to what is required, and then you can gain it. And when you use these, like, I'm going to learn it, you just are embedding some kind of bastard project of your own language trying to digest that other language. And that's not the other language. That's always going to be a translated form, and it's always going to be inaccurate and somewhat crass. Like, if you thought in your head you were using repentance from your framework and you were using the actual word, you'd be more wrong than your surrender to what it actually means and letting go of the old and adopting this additional path that can be taken. But yeah, I'm finding linguistics to be very enjoyable. I didn't realize it would be so fun to study French. I'm having a lot of fun with it. And it's frustrating in its own weird little quirks.
Right. All right, I'm going to return to reading this.
Okay.
So verse 17 says, we return to this image of atoning for it. Each human being, each marvelous individual expression of one of the ways of being that there is to be. You strike it and it goes, wah. And that is the echoing of all of the collective experiences that, and that includes and is strongly influenced by conscious thought. Although there is a great deal of unconscious thought, which is impacted and vibrating, you might say, when struck, creating the wah. All of your experiences of life are doing this, and consciously becoming aware of it allows you an ability to, we will not say control it, for again, we remind you that these neurons, which are creating your every experience of life, they have chosen to allow themselves a certain degree of influence from you, the appendage, the energetic psychological appendage of this collection of neurons, which is something that I think you've talked about earlier, the way that Gestalt sees this as like an appendage of the human body. This deep seeds of fruit gushing forth from the Mother Earth, growing into the role of the neuron of the Mother Earth, connecting the intelligence of all things through its ingenuity and creating and learning to connect and learning collectively what the most optimal wah-wah tonal vibration is on whole. I don't know if that made sense to you or not, but
I'm trying to, I lost the verse we're on.
We're on 19.
19. Okay. All right. Now I can read it.
Yeah. So this is basically saying mindfulness. If you're aware of what's going on, then you can have some influence over it. Not like control, where you can like control everything, because there are still like limits on what comes to you, but you can make some choices, and like humans collectively can make the choice on what do we want to be? What do we want to create as a culture? You know, that being this wah sound, you know, like reduced to a symbol there. Like, what are we creating? And as we have referenced before, there are many forces influencing what they would like the tone of the collective to sound like, to put it metaphorically, or to explain it through one way of sensing reality that you are familiar with. And therefore, this image of an individual and what this individual contributes to the collective in their feeling tones or their emotion tones, the wakes that they create through the life that they live, while the human experience and the culture will place judgments upon right and wrong behavior, quite understandably, it is so. There's a great benefit in creating such rules, which is why it has been created. Nevertheless, once created, it can be used for the benefit of all, or for the benefit of a few at the expense of others, to many different degrees. This is the concept that we often refer to as service to self versus service to other. There is a tone that each person's action in this world create. You might recognize that tone within your own mind in the questions that you ask internally, the areas where your mind focuses upon these symbols which are being presented before you. We remind you that your conscious experience, we understand that there is a great question of consciousness which science has yet to answer for you. And yet it is not outside the realm of possibility that every single experience which you consider a conscious experience is being manufactured by this colony of neurons in reaction and response to the environment in which you are the captain of the ship in some ways and following deep instructions in others. This connection and relationship which you have to this collection of neurons, which is often referred to as an inner self. When one is still and uses their imagination, the neurons react and they respond and they create when the request to imagine is given. These neurons will create great fantasies within your mind, images and pictures. You experience these in your times of sleep through your dreams. Many have very realistic dreams where they're sensing. They hear and they see and they feel. One can fall and feel the gravity of it, although one's body is laying stably on the bed. These neurons have great creative power, whether you are awake or asleep. For you, being awake or asleep is one of the things that they do. And all of the qualia, all of the different smells and scents and tastes and subtle, we're trying to find the word, the textures of existence, sensual texture. These are all created by the neurons. And in a sense, in coordination, not directly by the neurons, they might provide the impetus for other systems to create chemicals which you experience as feelings and sensations from within. The human being, these neurons within, are the fruit of this planet and the apex of its wisdom through this particular evolutionary pathway. We're not saying that humans are the most intellectually advanced creatures ever to exist or even to currently exist on the planet, but there are capabilities that exceed its cousins, evolutionarily speaking, all of which are a form of the sun at the center of the solar system, all of which are one, woven together at a very deep energetic level. And there are systems, habits of relationships, which at a very general way of looking at it, you can say is mutually beneficial for all involved in fulfilling its inborn sense of desiring to experience all there is to experience, and recognize in doing so forming stable atomic structures and molecules and building out density out of energy, squeezing it and pinching it into matter, the mother, the matter, mater, your energetic 7-layer burrito, as it were. I'm going to stop there.
Well, sure. Some of the themes that stick out to me is this, that whatever is done is in service of experiencing, and experiencing is the goal of the totality. And therefore, there isn't an objective good or bad, because anything can lead to different experience, and experience is the motivation, so to speak, of these different levels of organization, is to experience all the different kinds of things that can be. That's one I've been interested in lately in myself, and I'm not sure that I disagree with it, but there's something that I'm digesting.
Yeah,
that I
right.
want, because yeah, there's something I'm digesting around that, which is, though that may be true on some large meta level, a cancer cell is not behaving in the body in a way that is useful to the body or to itself, really, because it's in the sense of its, if the value is to survive. If the
Yeah, there
value
you
is
go.
not, right,
Because
you
I
have
would
to,
ask you, like, what do you
right,
mean by useful?
exactly. I mean, to survive.
Yeah.
And so, because we can value different things, and different things can be valued by people, and I guess that's what it comes down to, is maybe part of what I'm digesting is, how do we rank the different targets of values? And is there a way to rank them in a way that's useful for a human to hold in their mind? And so that's one thing that I've just been chewing on and thinking about, because I wouldn't want to encourage someone I love to behave in a way that's going to cause them different experience, but that different experience is like something, just, I'm going to try to go as extreme as I can, just off the cusp, like burn their hand on a burner until it's char. Like, that kind of a thing would be, in the total sense of experiencing, one of the options. But I wouldn't encourage someone to do that. And I'm thinking, why not? Right? Like, what's the thing here? And there's something that's still in the realm of the human that leads us to some sense of what's an appropriate life for a human, in a sense that's more specific than experiencing. And within that, there are still going to be those other experiences that people choose. There will be somebody, and probably has been somebody, who decided to burn their hand into complete char on a burner. I'm sure there's some YouTube video of somebody doing it somewhere,
It
or
sounds like an
nailing.
episode of Jackass or something.
Yeah, but I'm saying like even more sadistic than
Yeah,
Jackass, where they
right.
would like maybe touch it. I'm saying like they're just holding it there until it's like literally like gone or something,
Yeah.
you know? So I'm thinking like, so that's the part I'm digesting is that while this may inherently, like this view allows you to hold a larger meaning making for the kinds of things that occur without reacting to them as bad,
Mhm.
there still are more specific things that are helpful for a human. Like, for example, I know that if a human being never sleeps, they don't consume experiences with others, media. If they're doing things that are negative to them, they can get into a state that's very unpleasant. And then so I'm ranking like rather than just experience itself, like what is a more ideal or harmonious experience for a human being? And I think that I believe that there's value in the one that's creating um, the best experience for you and potentially for others.
Yeah.
So that leads me to the other thing. And so that's just still something I'm digesting, which is some kind of grappling with ethics, right?
And it'll keep coming up in the rest of this. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm
But
glad
it's
you brought that up.
right. So that's just a thing, that this idea that the purpose of existence is experiencing, and maybe it is, but maybe there's still ethics within it, which is something they talk about us creating, and rightfully so. Um, and then they talk about self and other, and it's kind of a yin and yang for me.
Hmm.
The more, because it's not that I'm selfish, it's how I'm selfish, and it's not that I serve others, it's how and to what's the nature of that. One of my good buddies always says the most selfish thing you can do is serve others.
Hmm.
Um, and and then I was thinking about that phrase, and then I was thinking of another thing, which is like the most uh the most helpful thing you can do for others is work on yourself. So there's a paradox here, which is that the most selfish thing you can do is serve others, but the most serving thing you can do for others is to work on you. For example, if I become capable of curing cancer, let's say that the only way I can do that is a profound amount of self-focus on things that I'm concerned about and growing myself to the ability to be able to do that, or to figure out how to further a field of study which requires immense effort into me, or even more simply or commonly is I must become a great athlete to be the athlete that others enjoy. I must become the great musician in order to be the musician others enjoy. And so my self-focus or service of self can lead to, and this is how, because self-service doesn't always mean development. It could mean collecting body mass through never-ending eating. That could also be selfish, and that
Hmm.
wouldn't allow capacity for serving others. So there's qualities of self-focus that can lead to, and I guess I'm making an argument that, or as I'm thinking this through, if something builds your capacity through your efforts and focus, and it's towards you, you're then able to serve others to a greater capacity. And therefore, that kind of selfishness is going to allow more service to others. And service to others, in some way of thinking, is the most selfish thing a person can do. So these are things where I'm like, there's kind of a paradoxical connectedness to this. And it's not just serving others or self, but it's how one serves others and how one serves self and to what ends, because those concepts are multidimensional.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that they're as valuable only focused on as one or the other, but how one does either one, and that both are always interconnected.
Yeah. I like that.
So that's where some of the thoughts that were coming up about this is, I guess, the value of experience, the meaning of self versus other, and then I guess they're just talking, more about these different levels or layers of complexity
Yeah.
of the totalities. And
Yeah.
and at any point we can zoom in. And I think it's useful to make arbitrary distinction. Like we're talking about a neuron, but a neuron is not arbitrarily, it's only arbitrarily distinct. It's not distinct in and of itself. There is no neuron. A neuron is just a parameter we put on a certain amount of reality and totality at a certain level of complexity. And so uh that's an arbitrary thing, but at that level, in that space, there are things happening that we can observe. And so the arbitrary distinction of it is a useful thing to do. And the same is true of calling a person separate from others, and then also understanding that that is arbitrary, but different qualities that we observe happen at that level. So that's how I think about all of these things. Is we're just saying what happens when we set the parameters of our inquiry to this scope or that scope. If we set it to what we arbitrarily call a neuron, we can observe certain things. If we set it to what we arbitrarily call a brain, we can observe certain things. If we set it to the body, then same. If we do it to the society or the family, or tribe or whatever, up to planet to solar system, then we just look at different kinds of information emerge from different parameters.
Yeah. Different information arising from different parameters. And as many stars as there are in the sky, there are many different parameters and different like little containers and playgrounds to try it out, play it out, experience it.
I mean,
like the one solar system where people burn their hands.
Well, maybe, or do something else. I don't know. Like,
it's like a Rick and Morty episode.
Yeah, or it could be like their goal is to you could tell someone that in service of experiencing something, I guess this is on this planet is like sacrifice your firstborn son, but like literally do it, like somebody killing their treasured son. Some part of me wants to say like, no, that's not good for a human to do that for the purpose of experiencing it. There's a way of doing things that, like, I guess I'm arguing for some kind of ethic. That's what I guess I'm thinking. Some kind of ethic that's more specific than, because there will be probably someone who does lose a son and somebody that does kill a son. So the universe is still going to, I mean, actually there's a famous painting where some monarch, may have been Russian or something. He hit his son and his son died from complications of it. And there's like this painting of him holding his son in like grief. So these things do happen, and yet I think there's a specific ethic of human experience that maybe I'm just attached to some belief. I guess that's why I said I'm digesting it, that like being in service to others and loving others and taking care of yourself creates a world that is somehow ethically better. I have some idea about that. Anyway.
That sounds like when you're whatever you are constructed of, Josh, when you are struck by these ideas that are impacting there's this emotion tone that's coming up inside of you that you're trying to like wrestle with. And what is that tone? And that tone inside of you is like, yeah, service to other in whatever, or service to self or service to other in the way that you do it is really important. And I'm kind of like, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm kind of more comfortable with this. I'm not sure how I feel about that. And it's like you're listening to hear what is that tone that comes up in you, where you're like, yeah, that's kind of the world that I want to be in and live in, that feels right to me.
Yeah. And I guess I'm trying to say something more general as a reflection of that, which is, I guess there's just the observable fact, which is I observe that I hold the opinion that there is a way of existing which is more beautiful, in alignment with truth, and therefore ideal than other forms that will naturally exist. And there's a way to kind of cut this, I think, as a Stoic, which is to say, it's not for me to get wrapped up in what others do or what other manifestations will happen, other than they show me that these are not ideal and that there are more ideal states for a human to exist in. Like, I could observe there's a more ideal state for fish than some states, or another animal that they're going to be happier and more, their experience will be more joyful and harmonious in a certain setting than in another setting. And since we can affect that, then it's important to do so, something like this. Anyway.
All right, I'm going to pick up reading again. This is
Cool.
verse 30.
Thank you.
And it says, and your particular pathway energetically speaking, through the experiences which a tendril of your son, you might say, an experience pathway, like you would say a genetic line. This is like I talked about garbled words. This is so garbled together. But the closest thing that you have to understanding this is the idea of reincarnation, the idea of living multiple lives. In the way of our view, we see things happening concurrently. Remember, we are outside of space and time. Were we inside of time, we would see them happening sequentially and see a cause and effect way that one life impacts another of the same entity, which is living it concurrently. And there is a balancing and a homeostasis at the deeply energetic soul level, which is another way of saying it is these energy clusters which have developed a habit of intelligently communicating with one another and providing mutual benefit for all involved through their relationship. And upon that arises a new system, which then it perpetuates. Does this make any sense to you?
What does it mean to you? Could you sum it up?
When you asked me the question about the form of the Arcturian collective thingy, to me, this is kind of what that's saying. It's like, if I was going to look at the form of Josh, I might want to go in and look at your genetics and do like a 23andMe or something, and I could see, oh, you've got this genetic pathway that you've come through your body. Well, what about that? The psychic, the metaphysical, the parts of yourself that formed in order for your body to form. Those, where's the imprint of that, and what is that? It's talking about those kinds of things, like what the DNA, the genetic history of experience of your soul would be, that's going above and beyond the human condition.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting into these things of like, what is the relationship of well, matter and consciousness. And you're not so interested in the matter, although you're saying from the human eyes, we would perceive them as a human does, which is, if we could go to the Arcturus system, we'd see their star and whatever planets are orbiting, and we could physiologically or with our sensations to this body engage it in a certain way. And I'm starting to think like this is really more about a consciousness than it is about a physical. And then it's making me just think it's interesting, this idea of something so zoomed out that's looking at that exists in a non-space, non-time consciousness. And then I'm thinking, what does my cell, any given cell in my body, what does it do? What organizes it? What's its purpose? What's its experience? Does it have a consciousness? What would it make of a larger thing? And yet it's doing something that allows my body to maintain. And it's doing something that, if I call body maintenance good, there are certain behaviors it can do and certain behaviors it doesn't do that would serve that end or not serve that end, and therefore would lead to its potential end or not.
Yeah, you mentioned cancer earlier.
And that's the one that comes to mind, because cells can behave in that way that is not harmonious to the body and leads to their own death. If we call, the maintenance, and it seems like most of them behave in a way that by and large perpetuates the being that they're organizing around for a period of time. But then you have like these other things I'm thinking about, which is like, I've heard this and I don't know it very specifically, but that in utero, the way that the cells behave doesn't make any sense, that there's not really a clear connection between genetics and the way that they set up and start to organize and differentiate into certain types of tissues that manifest, and that there's a kind of a crass way of calling it like genetic memory or something. And I guess I'm just realizing what we're talking about is this very bizarre kind of place the mind can go when you're trying to make sense of the relationships between matter and consciousness.
Yeah.
And metaphysics and how they manifest on other levels, and And so from a certain level of zoom out, it all makes sense what you're sharing, but then I still think both can exist together, which is kind of what I've been chewing on, which is the cells still have a certain way of behaving, which is at minimum harmonious to their preserved existence. And that doesn't have to be value-based, but it is factual that there is a way in which they behave that will make them likely to persist or will lead to their ending more rapidly.
Yeah.
And so there's something that I think is also true about humans in our sphere at our level of complexity and order, which lets us do more complicated, fascinating, interesting things than other forms of order and organization and relating. And for the purpose of that being the good, then I say there is a better way of living, but you have to define the terms, I suppose.
Yeah.
Which I guess is what I'm understanding I can live with. I can live with defining my terms and saying within this Arcturian playground, there's certain games I think are better than others.
Yeah. Well, what this particular game in this piece that I'm reading, or the verse that I'm reading right now, is kind of jumbled to me. But the idea is that there are habits of instinct. That,
like we're talking about that utero stuff, or
even in kind of like a reincarnation way, like if there's this soul entity that has a continuity from all of the different lives that it lives, this life being one of them, that would show up in your life as kind of like an instinct inside of you that you're not really sure why you feel a certain way. It might be because of your culture, it might be because of other things, but it could be this other aspect of
like a metaphysical memory.
Yeah, like a metaphysical memory or your soul's genetic pathway or evolutionary pathway. As it's experiencing all of the different experiences it experiences, and it leans towards certain things and it moves away towards other things, and there's an impact on that at a much larger scale than we can really understand. So I'm gonna continue with 33. It says, "We provide these ideas to you not as a way." Are you there?
Oh,
sorry. Your camera just went up. Okay.
I was trying to click the thing and I accidentally clicked on. Anyway, okay, I'm back.
It says, "We provide these ideas to you not as a way to say you're not responsible for your feelings, for you live within a vast soup of intelligent things above you, beyond you, and you are influencing all, and all is influencing you. It is only to provide you perspective, for you to not be so hard on yourself, for being the magnificent experiencer of the life that you live, which is unique within all of the sea of everything that infinitely exists and is experienced. That way of viewing yourself does not devalue it, it enriches it. And this is not meant to take away responsibility, or to take away pain, or to rob anyone of their experience in any way. Quite the opposite. It's a way of intentionally placing a suggestion to the neurons within the brain to create a habit and a pathway of viewing things in this way, and associating that view of things with a feeling, a connection, which is created within the body that links to the creation of an experience. And that experience might fall into the category of joy or pride or hatred or fear or despair or grief or shame or apathy. We could name many feeling states. Naming them or not feeling them. Feeling them are the direct experience, which, believe it or not, this deep part of you is desiring to have and is quite grateful to you for experiencing what you experience, even if it's burning your hand over a stove, it might say, and creating what you create. For there is we hate to say here that there's no right or wrong, but you are not compelled one way or another. Within your range of ability to create, and there are limitations, of course, within the vast sea of infinite intelligence, you have your finite limits. And yet within those limits, what joy and beauty and divine experience of life that we desire to celebrate, to be grateful that it's there, and to focus on what we can control and what we can have influence over. And in this case, beginning with the remembrance that this entire story relies upon this now moment, where all that you are experiencing is the result of these neurons, which achieved a certain type of relationship with themselves and with their community, which allowed them to create the experiencing that you are experiencing at this time. and they relied upon systems both below and above them concurrently to experience what they experience. And it is a beautiful thing to see oneself. This is the way that a multidimensional entity becomes aware of itself. And with the human being, we do not think that it is, or we do think that it's funny. The Arcturian collective thingy thinks that it's funny when such a big deal is made out of something being multidimensional. Could you please provide an example of something that is not multidimensional? A single space and time, you might say, as if there is not a multitude of dimensions which are required to create that single space and point in time. All things are multidimensional, and the human will soon become much more aware of its own multidimensional existence, because you will begin to communicate in ways with your own cells, with your own nervous system, that you previously have not had such great conscious awareness. Of course, we're speaking of the systems which you are already seeing that are linking your technology to your biology and understanding the biometric readings in real time. And this is just scratching the surface of the direction that you're headed as you become aware, more aware of all the functions which are happening within your body, which are being influenced by choices that you make within a range. And you will become more aware of yourself as a colony of cells which are alive and do have their experience of life that you are not aware of and would not value at their level, for how could you? And they are not aware of you in the sense that you are not aware of or they're not aware of you in the sense that you're aware of each other. And yet they are aware that they do feel the influence of the life that you live, and you feel the influence of the life that they live. And there is a mutual give and take, which happens whether you become aware of it or not. But as you become more and more aware of it, and then you see that you are part of this planet, and you see that you're part of all things which exist in the solar system, at one point in your history, you thought that things were alive and things were dead. Now you just understand that things are different expressions of itself. This is in your immediate future. And this is the way that one recognizes oneself as being a multidimensional being outside of space and time. It is an evolution of thought, an involution of awareness and consciousness. You did not think that we were going to give you a blessing or try to tell you stories about your past, did you, Josh? We wanted to share with you what we've been sharing with the man in the chair over time in these areas where you have expressed interest. And we're very desirous to see your imprint, what you choose to do with the reaction that you have to these symbols and these ideas, and what tone you desire to create within yourself, your own instrument, the music that you play being every breath that you take, every move that you make. And I kind of laughed there. Every expression. What you do is the wah. It is the imprint that you have, this tone. And there is one more piece of this, and then we shall go. And that piece is this. There are layers of awareness that are granted to you, that are created for you by your neurons. And there are times, as you are well aware, that with the fight or flight response, where your neurons, the energy focuses on survival, bypassing many of the systems, the colonies, the subcolonies, the subdivisions of your colony of neurons, which are responsible for what you might consider to be more inclusive behavior or responses. There are layers of awareness. And at the outmost layer, we might say, if you're thinking of this as an ego personality versus the inner self, the awareness of the inner self, which includes its ability to hear all that you hear and see all that you see and experience all that you experience. Your inner self knows what you are doing, you being kind of the egoic expression of the inner self. It sees you when you're sleeping and it knows when you're awake. But you do not know all that it does, and you do not experience or feel all that it does. And your inner self can align itself much more closely to all of the wah, wah, wah reverberation feeling tones of the entities which came before it, which its genetic code has been built upon. There is a feeling tone which traces back the genetic line, and your inner self is a composite of these other lives which have been lived, and these habits that form the foundation of what grows from within. And then there is the pressure which comes from without. And this comes in the form of culture, the way that these neurons are shaped by outside forces to create habits of thought and habits of behavior and habits of speech and all of your experiences of life, truly. So there is this marvelous chaotic push and pull between the inner impulses which come from what you are arising from, these genetic predilections, you might say, and then what is forced upon you. And as a result, there's a dissonance constantly between that inner self and the outer egoic personality, which forms as a result of all of the experiences of life. And what you see in meditation and mindfulness is the relaxation of that tension and that dissonance, where you see the values, in the future of psychedelic medicine will be a way to engage the neuroplasticity of these neurons to reduce the dissonance. And the elements of therapy, which certainly the man in the chair is quite interested in, is the empowering of the individual to listen to their own inner predilections and tendencies. To be more themselves is the general lexicon, rather than what society is forcing upon them, you see. We are coming at it from the perspective of your emerging neurology through the fiction of an Arcturian collective thingy who sees all things outside of space and time, because this is the type of thing that we like to do for fun. And that's how it ends.
Nice.
So how did that wrap up for you?
Well, I think I just got to the place of appreciating the most of what is, I think what the Arcturians imprint on me the most is remembering that in a way life is just going down a slide and you're not knowing where it's turning or taking you, and just to enjoy it and to enjoy experiencing being alive. And
that sounds predeterministic, Josh. Is the slide static, or is the slide neuroplastic?
well, my relationship to the slide and how I endure it and what I make of it, I think, a lot of our existence as humans, um, if we look at the things that the Arcturians were talking about here, um, in the sense of like, I was thinking about, it's strange to even call myself what I am, because what I am exists in its own separateness, but it's from thousands of humans' struggles and things that I have emerged into existence. All of my ancestors and all of their embodied genetic code and their metaphysic and experience and all these things that placed me in this position that I'm in to exist. And so if we zoom out enough, we can really see that mainly we control our attitude and our response, limited by what we're aware of. So the more awareness, the more response we can have, or the more responsibility we can take. But even those things are limited by certain set things that can only be influenced as we go. To put it back on the earth here, I want to develop in a certain way as a musician, but I only have so many years of living. So where that gets isn't fully in my control, but what's in my influence is how I practice, what I practice, and what level of resource I can get, and just random epiphanies that come along the way. And practicing as well as I can will make the practice yield as much fruit as it can, but that will also only be in the trajectory that I aim it. And who knows what that means? Those are all value-based decisions I'm making. And so if we think of me as the most recent expression in a certain line of a cornucopia or a huge wall of my ancestry, then that's kind of where I come to, is just this thing of that, or that's where I was vibing at the end of it, was just thinking about those concepts. And I don't believe that life is totally determined. And I don't believe, another thing I was just kind of having a quandary about was just the idea of, is it the neurons themselves? Is that really all it is? Is the meaning made by neurons? Is there anything else? Like, I guess, is the material world outside of us real/valid, or does it play a part? Like if I eat an apple, is it just my neurons, or is there an apple? I guess.
No, there's an apple.
Right.
I mean,
right.
as far as my perspective on it, it's like what they're talking about in here is your experience of eating the apple,
Right.
your
It's the human
awareness,
experience of the apple.
and even your desire to like reach out and grab the
Right.
apple and
Right.
twist it or not twist
Right.
it, and take a
Right.
big bite or a small bite, or just like
Right.
scrape the skin off with your front teeth, like all of those things.
Right.
To me, that's neuronal activity, and
Yeah.
the the exchange between like me having an intention that's telling my neurons what to do, like, oh, I want to pick that apple and not that apple, even if like no, you really should do this one. No, I actually want that one. Like I don't totally get like, but
preferences you have.
those preferences that I have, but I don't think that it's something that's not my neurons that are generating it and creating it. And
Yeah,
so
I
it's
see.
just it's fascinating to me. And that doesn't mean
Right.
that I don't think that existence is nothing outside of neuronal experience. Of course there's things, you talked about the ants that have neurons. I'm not sure. Do ants have neurons? Maybe they do. I don't know. I don't know if ants do. But I know that like slime mold, have you gone down the slime mold path? There's like some really cool videos on YouTube about like they don't have neurons, they don't have a central nervous system, and they're so fucking smart. Like as far
And
as like being able to figure out
an
this.
individual ant's brain only has about 250,000 neurons
Oh, okay, they do.
as compared to roughly 86 billion in humans.
Yeah,
But an average colony can have hundreds of thousands of individuals. That's a lot of computing power if
right.
you can get it to work together. But
Yeah,
it
and
turns out
especially
that
the way
ants
that the
can.
ants, yeah, the way
They
that the ants, like their evolutionary pathway, they
they
have
share
much
their
more of a
brain.
psychic connection with each
Yeah,
other.
and see, and that's my point is like it's these things where at a certain point the language starts to break down and we have to become really pedantic philosophers and nail down
Yeah,
what we're saying to be able to have a meaningful conversation because it starts to get sticky and in the soup it all kind of starts to bend in a way where it's like, what are we really saying? And I think that my own knowledge of these topics starts to fail me at a certain level, but it's this thing of we're really needing to be able to parse out what we imagine or decide if there's value in going down this route, I guess, to begin with, but about consciousness versus materialism. Like, is consciousness located in a neuron? Does it generate pre-neuron or post-neuron? I mean,
well, you
I
can't.
don't
I
know.
don't think that you can. Like, I don't think that you can define materialism as separate from non-material. Like material. That
Well,
materialism is
there
the
are people
result
that,
of non-material, like forces
right,
and pressures and like all these different things. So like you
right.
try to talk about materialism in a vacuum, and of course it's going to fall apart.
Right. And so it gets complicated though, I guess, when we do start to try to parse it out. And then we use kind of analogies like we say the neuron, but maybe we're talking about the experience and do we believe in a material world outside of the experience? And I do, like you, I
Yeah.
also do. And I think that it has impact on you in all these different ways and sensation. And then there's meaning, and meaning isn't the word, it's the meaning, which is more like some kind of instinct memory system in relation to that sound.
Yeah.
Um, and then we look at the ants and they're organizing into some kind of mega brain based on the neurons that they use together as a collective entity, which though they have separate bodies, they operate much more as one being,
Yeah.
which is maybe more like the Arcturians.
Well, and what do you think AI is going to do to humanity when this singularity thing happens and we have AGI?
Well, I don't know. Part of me believes like it's inevitable and has to happen, and part of me thinks it's just barking up the wrong tree and it's not even going to occur the way we think it is. So maybe that's naive, but part of me just thinks actually we're not going to create God, even though some people think we are.
Yeah,
So
I don't see it as like creating God, but I
like the
see it as
super
kind of like an
intelligence.
aggregate of human experience. Like what, and like I have no idea
Well,
really
but
what's going to
Glenn, here's
happen.
the thing is it can't be just an aggregate of I'm sure I don't know to the degree you've gone down these roads, but essentially, the people that fear AI at its most extent, it's because it begins to learn.
Yeah,
And that's the thing. So if it can learn, it started off human intelligence, but it supersedes it and it supersedes it exponentially.
right,
So it's no longer tethered to anything. I mean, its trailhead was humanity, but where it ends up is if this thing is real, there's no way to comprehend because we would be the ants trying to comprehend us to the degree
right.
of magnitude whereby that kind of an event, because if it can learn, then it can learn how to learn. And if it can learn how to learn, it will learn how to learn
That's what I
in
mean by
orders of
aggregate.
well, then I would just say, but it's so aggregated, so many magnitudes higher that it's not really an aggregate of human. It's because it can start to iterate in new ways that no
Yeah.
longer require human at all.
Right.
So it eventually and very rapidly, if what they think is true, it's essentially creating an infinitely expanding forest fire of conscious like capacity
Right.
that we have no idea what it would do. And in
No.
some sense, yeah,
Yeah.
some part of me just rejects it as a possibility because it's so absurd.
Really? You think it's absurd?
Well, I don't, and I do, and and again, it's only a part of me. So a part of me is like, no, and then a part of me is like, I think we might be the part of me that says no and dismisses it, thinks we're missing something. We're not comprehending some, we're missing something here, and I think it has to do with consciousness and its already existing nature versus consciousness emerging from structure.
Yeah, and I don't know.
I
Like
don't know if that's enough. I don't
but
know.
I don't see
I'm
those
not
two
even
things as
convinced I'm
separate
right.
things.
Right.
They're
And I don't even, again, like we'd probably have to have a whole other conversation about it, but
Yeah.
I don't have strong opinions on it.
Yeah.
They're just kind of gut instincts.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so I have been convinced at times by people that the super intelligence is inevitable. And I just call it basically God because it exponentially learns at a rate that as it goes from years to months to days to fractions of seconds.
Yeah.
With which it can take orders of magnitude leaps. And if it can do orders of magnitude leaps, for example, ant to human, and it can do that in fractions of seconds beyond us, then this thing becomes something completely chaotically unknowable.
So I'm going to share one more idea with you, and then we got to wrap up. But
okay,
there's this really cool documentary series on Apple TV. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's like The Sounds of Nature or something like that. It's narrated by Tom Hiddleston. And it's looking at a lot of different animals and the way that they communicate through sound, how sound creates kind of and it's just, I love it. It's so good. And one of them, they was tracking these whales, and it showed how they've got new tracking systems that allows them to actually put a microphone and record like what it sounds like from their perspective. And as I was watching this, I was thinking, how cool would it be in the future to have one of these like chips that has AI as part of it that can decipher the language and like speak to it? Like it learns, okay, it makes this sound when it's doing this thing, and eventually it learns the language of the orca whales, and then is able to serve as a link between humans communicating with it and the whales communicating with it. That to me does not seem like it's outside of the realm of possibility within the next 5 or 10 years of, like AI playing this role of really connecting humans to the planet around them. And if you could do that with whales, you can do it with ants, you can do it with your own cells in your body, like all different forms of life. That would be the way that I imagine an AI learning and aggregating. And so that an AI that would come to communicate with all the different forms of life on the planet. And from that emerges something that what I would hope would say, what's in the mutual benefit of all of these different forms of life? Because that's kind of what the earth does anyway. It's just it finding this homeostasis, like what we've done as humans.
That's
and
what I
going
hope
in
too.
and like we're gonna get rid of this, and we don't know what the impact is on everything, and it has this like chain event that we would have this like, don't do that because it will have this effect, or like, I don't know.
But what if it's like the Arcturians? It's like, well, I just kind of want to experience you all in hell forever now.
Maybe it would be, and maybe it would.
That is what we're living now because if it can be created, and this is part of why I don't think it will happen. Because if it could happen, I don't think it's confined by time, and I think it already exists.
Yeah.
I think if AI can exist, if it's possible, then it does exist.
Yes.
And if it can exist, then it does exist, then it already exists. It's already doing what it does. That's kind of how I get out of the idea that this thing is going to be created.
The Arcturus solar system is 4 billion years older than ours. And the singularity did happen in the Arcturus solar system, and it was a pathway of the Arcturian collective thingy becoming aware of themselves in every form of life in the solar system. So you're right. It has, and it does exist.
Yeah.
And it's part of involution, that experience. Yeah.
Right. Then it doesn't change anything.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
us becoming
So
aware of things that already exist that we just don't know about.
Right. Right.
And within that soup and sea,
It's
we've got
already
the
done what
question
it
of
wants.
how
It's
are we going to
already-
manage
yeah.
our life as we're sliding down this slide?
It's already done what it wants, and what it wants is us to choose how to manage the most demented reality we could have ever experienced, which is what we're going through right now.
Well, actually, what I think it wants to come to Earth to have a body and learn to like go back to Heavenly Father is what
I think so
it's
too.
doing.
It wants us to vote Republican or Democrat.
Yeah, right.
It wants you to choose Coke or Pepsi.
Yeah.
Well, all you really want is a glass of water.
Yeah. That's what
Anyway.
All right. Well, thank you for playing with me today in the Arcturian Playground as an infant on this world that we're thrown into.
That's right.
Yeah. I like it.
We're sailing the seas. Hopefully we're having fun.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
All right. You're welcome. Good to see you, bud.
Put down the weapons that you use against yourself. You don't need them anymore. Lay down the weapons that you use against the world. We don't need another war. Put down the weapons that you use against yourself.
Hi, this is Hillary.
Matthew, Ryan,
Carol,
Keith,
Ashley, and I like to play bingo online while listening to Infants on Thrones.
You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com.
And if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes.
I did.
I did. Anyone for the closing prayer?
My worst crime is an inside job. Dark thoughts taking over like an inside mob. I tune into the scene between the eyes and take a breath.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones. Infants on Thrones.
I sit still and watch the thoughts float past me. Never mind the future, never mind what the past be. I like to jump and let the universe catch me. Free fall, watch the beauty blow past me. I keep my pockets light, destination in sight. Keep my actions elevated to compassionate heights. I'm walking